Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Israel's widening air and ground offensive is forcing Palestinian civilians to be packed together in dire humanitarian conditions. The European Union raises concerns over a surge in migration from Africa after Niger repeals a law that criminalized the transport of migrants in the country. And a Zimbabwean-American rugby player at Howard University reflects on the explosive growth and success of her team. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. The fighting in the Israel-Hamas war remains fierce. Israel has designated a safe zone in southern Gaza, but its growing air and ground assault has left the Palestinian enclave citizens crowded together in very poor humanitarian conditions. UN monitors say that a hospital in the southern town of Khan Yunis received its first delivery of supplies on Thursday since November 29th. A huge explosion rocked Gaza on Friday as Israeli officials say they must eradicate the Hamas militant group. Israel also says it is doing everything possible to remove civilians from harm's way. More than 17,000 Palestinians have been killed, according to the Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry, since October 7th, when Israel began bombarding Gaza in response to a cross-border rampage by Hamas militants who control the Palestinian enclave. Israel says the October 7th Hamas attack on its soil killed 1,200 people, with 240 people taken hostage. The UN Security Council votes on Friday on a resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says there is a gap between the Israeli government's declared intentions to protect civilians and the casualties. Diane Toll has more.
Israelis have been evacuating neighborhoods instead of entire cities.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken on Thursday made his strongest public criticism so far of Israel's conduct of the war in South Gaza.
It remains imperative that Israel put a premium on civilian protection. And there does remain a gap between exactly what I said when I was there, the intent to protect civilians, and the actual results that we're seeing on the ground.
Blinken was speaking at a news conference following a meeting with Britain's Foreign Secretary in Washington. It comes as Israeli forces continue their bombardment of the Palestinian enclave, battling Hamas militants in Gaza's biggest cities. Israel has said it is doing everything possible to get civilians out of harm's way, including warnings about military operations. Blinken is due to meet top diplomats from Arab states, including Egypt, in Washington on Friday. The United Arab Emirates has asked for the UN Security Council to vote Friday morning on a draft resolution for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza. But the United States, which has veto power in the Council, opposes a ceasefire because it believes that would only benefit Hamas. According to the White House, U.S. President Joe Biden spoke separately by phone with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Jordan's King Abdullah, stressing the critical need to protect civilians. And in a further development on humanitarian assistance, Israel has agreed to a U.S. request to open the Kerem Shalom border crossing at the junction of Gaza, Egypt and Israel to screen aid trucks headed for Gaza. That's according to a senior U.S. official who said it would help speed up the inspection process for desperately needed aid to be sent to Gaza through the Rafah crossing with Egypt. On the time frame of the border opening, an Israeli official told reporters on Thursday, quote, "It will happen in the next few days."
Diane Toh of Reuters filed that report. About 200,000 Israelis have been evacuated from their homes in communities near the border with Gaza in the south or Lebanon in the north. They have been living in hotels and guest houses for 2 months now, and they have no idea when they will be able to go home. Linda Gradstein reports from Israel.
Some of the about 200,000 Israelis evacuated from communities near the borders with Gaza and Lebanon have nowhere to return to after their homes were bombed or burned by Hamas militants on October 7th. In the meantime, all of the evacuees have been living in limbo in hotels and guest houses all over Israel, including the Ya'arim Hotel at Ma'aleh HaChamisha outside of Jerusalem. They say they don't know when or if they will feel safe enough to return.
We don't have any place to go back to now. First of all, it's a closed military area, and nobody can promise me that they won't breach the border again. In our case, they came on hang gliders by air, but nobody can promise us that won't happen again either.
Many fled their homes immediately after the Hamas attack with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Volunteers mobilized to collect and distribute thousands of cartons of clothing, toys, and household items for the evacuee centers. This hotel provides room and 3 meals a day, as well as health services and recreational activities. Children have been integrated into local schools, and a nursery school has been opened inside the hotel. One of the teachers says the children seem calmer and happier now, 2 months after the October 7th attack.
In the beginning, they were very frightened. Any loud noise would scare them. There's a house here that was built by a volunteer that came, and many of the kids would crawl into it and find a safe haven for themselves. And they would close the windows and the doors. They would put blankets over the windows so that the baddies wouldn't be able to come in and find them.
About 400 of the original 550 evacuees from 2 Gaza border communities remain at the Ma'aleh HaChamisha hotel. Some have found alternative housing, either renting apartments or moving in with relatives. They say that families living long-term in small hotel rooms is challenging, especially for those already coping with trauma and stress.
Coming
here are children, fathers, and mothers who are not experiencing post-trauma, but are still feeling trauma itself. When there was a missile alert, which doesn't happen here often, the reaction was so different than the longtime residents here. There is trauma, it exists, and they are living it.
More than 1 million Palestinians in Gaza have also been displaced by the fighting, which has destroyed their homes. More than 80% of Gaza's population of 2.3 million is now crowded into the southern Gaza Strip, where they are living in United Nations schools and facilities. The Israeli evacuees say they are anxious to move back home, even though they recognize that it may take a long time, if ever, to feel safe in their homes again. Linda Gradstein, VOA News, Ma'aleh HaChamisha, Israel.
The European Union is voicing concerns over a surge in migration from Africa after Niger repealed a law that previously criminalized the transport of migrants in the country. Henry Ridgewell reports from London.
Agadez in Niger, a Sahara desert town that was long a hub for African migrants heading north to Libya and Algeria and onwards to Europe. But in 2015, at the height of a migrant crisis, the European Union struck an aid deal worth more than $1 billion with Niger, tied to a government crackdown on migration.
To build its border capacity and to draft this new law that would criminalize irregular migration and its facilitation, so the worker smugglers, basically.
Some 876 suspected people traffickers were prosecuted under the law, according to the EU. But in July this year, Niger's military ousted the democratically elected president Mohamed Bazoum in a coup. The military junta leader, General Abdurrahman Chiani, announced in November that the government was repealing the 2015 migrant law, and all convictions under the legislation would be quashed. The junta did not give a reason for the move. The European Union voiced fears of a new influx of migrants.
There is a huge risk that this will cause new deaths in the desert. That's the most concerning thing, but that will also probably mean more people coming to Libya, for example, and then maybe also trying to cross the Mediterranean to the EU.
Critics say the law itself forced migrant journeys to divert to more dangerous routes through the Sahara Desert. Local media report that the repeal of the law has been welcomed in Agadez and that migrant traffickers are planning to resume operations. Analysts say its implementation had devastated the local economy.
A number of people simply went out of a job in the region. So smugglers, of course, people who were facilitating the travel and the journey of migrants, but also a bunch of people who benefited directly or indirectly from the presence of migrants. So these are people who were preparing and selling food, people who were selling water, offering accommodation, or any other kind of service to migrants.
Before the law's implementation, the Nigerian army had often accompanied migrant convoys through the desert and demanded their own cut from the profits, says Fakri.
There might be an objective to return to the pre-2015 situation where migrant smuggling created revenues for the military and for the state.
Analysts say it's not clear how quickly the migrant flows could resume, as it depends on the situation in the migrants' countries of origin and in the transit countries north of Niger. The European Union has struck deals with some North African states to clamp down on irregular migration across the Mediterranean Sea. Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, London.
Rugby is an international sport that is quickly growing in popularity in the U.S. Takunda Rusike, founder and creator of the first historically black college and university competitive women's rugby team, reflects on the creation and explosive growth of the team. Jordan Smith has the details.
Takunda Rusike has always been an ambitious athlete. Now, you could call her an all-arounder who excels at nearly every sport she plays. But rugby, Rusike says, is in her blood. She grew up surrounded by her rugby-loving family who came to the United States from Zimbabwe. But as a first-generation American, Rusike found few opportunities for girls like her to play.
I was always exposed to it, but I always noticed, especially like when I was younger until I got to like high school, it really wasn't like offered for girls until I was in high school. So that's when I only started playing when I was like, you know, that late sophomore, early junior year of high school type thing, because it really wasn't offered until I was older.
At the age of 17, Rusike discovered the beauty and the intensity of rugby.
When I was playing rugby, I literally felt like I was at home. I played sports my whole life. I've been a swimmer. I played elite sports my whole life. I've been a swimmer, played basketball, track. I went to states for track. I was varsity track captain in high school. I loved it. But there was nothing, I never felt as home as I do when I'm on the rugby field. When I would play rugby, it was like everything would just make sense. I would never have anxiety going to rugby practice. The way when I would go to basketball practice, track practice, there would be times where I didn't want to go. I wasn't excited, but I was always so excited to go to rugby.
That motivated Rusike to start a rugby program at Howard University, a top U.S. historically black college or university, or HBCU. Here, Rusike captains the only competitive HBCU women's rugby team, also known as the Herd. She says she also wanted to create a safe space for young black women to play and excel at the sport of rugby.
So growing up playing rugby in high school, I would oftentimes be the only black girl on my team, which was definitely an experience that I didn't always love. So when I had the opportunity to go to Howard on an academic scholarship, I knew that there was definitely like a gap to fill, and I didn't really understand as to why like there wasn't rugby at HBCUs.
Rusike's program is only 2 years old, but it's already made an impression on and off campus, including with this rugby player turned coach.
For me, I think the leadership that these ladies are showing within practice and even just as young women playing in the sport is huge. Like, they take to us very well, very respectful, and they're sponges in the game, and that's the only thing you ask for, especially being such an early program.
Last year, the Herd were undefeated in their division and outscored opponents 211-30 on the season. But just like in any rugby match, victory is never a sure thing. This year, the team went to the CRAA National Championship, but faced many challenges. First, they had to fundraise $25,000 to fund their team expenses. They then lost to California's Claremont University, 47-5. Players say a strong sense of unity and sisterhood helped the team face defeat, persevere, and try again.
While you're out, you're practicing and stuff, like, you know, you're not coming here to be just by yourself. You're coming here to play with other girls, so then you get that connection. It's like, I found my sisters here. Like,
Rusike says, despite these setbacks, the Herd aims to win the CRAA Division I National Championship next season. For VOA, I'm Jordan Smith here in Washington.
For more perspective on the game, Jordan Smith joins me here. Jordan, it's great to have you on Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
First of all, tell us what impressed you most about the team?
I think the biggest thing I literally was just impressed by was just the sense of teammate, and just, they were just also like, it was like family, you know, it was like they were all so close, connected, they were just so bonded, and it was just a very short period of time.
Mm-hmm. And what did you take away from the team? I mean, I've not seen so many girls so excited about rugby. Mm-hmm. What did you take away from that?
Really just that sports can kind of bridge together any group of people. I think it's like a lot of people didn't know what rugby was before they came onto the team, but it's like they joined the team and they were just able to just kind of just connect so fast through the shared thing of the sport, What
would you say was the most interesting thing that you learned talking to the girls, talking to the team leader, to CK? What did you see that, you know, we need to know? I would say
the biggest thing I kind of learned was just like rugby is a serious sport, even just for girls. Like, it's intense, it's ferocious, like it's a lot of just contact. And I think it was like they really handled it extremely well.
How does she train them? You know, how many times do they have to practice during the week?
Well, they practice, I think, they don't have their own practice facility, so they kind of use a public facility, but they practice pretty often, and I think that's one of the most impressive things. They kind of just find a way. They're very just adaptive with just everything across the board.
Jordan, that was a very, very good story. Thank you very much for covering it for us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Jordan Smith, sports reporter, right here in our studio today. Now, still to come, we learn what needs to be done to combat gender-based violence. We'll be right back.
You're watching VOA's Red Carpet. My name is Jackson Vunganyi. Thank you so much for joining us each week right here on Red Carpet. We bring you the latest in
In other news, Nigeria's Dangote Group says that 1 million barrels of crude it had purchased was the first of 6 million barrels that would be in the initial run of the refinery. Once fully running, the 650,000 barrel per day refinery funded by African billionaire Aliko Dangote will turn Nigeria into a net exporter of fuels. And a senior World Health Organization official says the WHO is extremely worried about the spread of a severe form of monkeypox that has killed nearly 600 people, mainly children, in the Democratic Republic of Congo this year. The Central African nation has reported over 13,000 cases in 2023, more than twice as many as during the last peak in 2020. As the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence nears an end, VOA's Antonella Bruto spoke to Inviola Nambi, a Ugandan gender-based violence activist and child welfare advocate, about her work combating gender-based violence across Uganda.
After the COVID-19 breakout, it was, gender-based violence cases were really very high. But then women had also lost the evidence to go out and report their perpetrators of gender-based violence. So you find that they were abused and the cases just went unhandled, unsettled. So they remained with the traumas of gender-based violence, sexual violence. And when women deliver, give us a chance to write proposals to advocate for reproductive health rights for women, I thought it would be a very good area for me to tackle and become a voice to the voiceless, the other women. So the rise of gender-based violence within that period triggered me to be an advocate of gender-based violence.
In your 2021 project, was it the engaging duty bearers and rights holders to eliminate and respond to gender-based violence? And I was curious, how did such a project come about? Why the Nakawa division specifically?
While we were introducing the application, it was in position to identify for us all the nearby facilities. It was in position to identify the probation officer's office. It was in position to identify medical facilities that one can run to acquire immediate response. And also, it was in position to identify the various police stations, especially the ones that handled the family and children protection unit, which is an office that is in position to support women that have been victimized by gender-based violence. But also, now when you look at the applicability of the app in the division, by the end of the project, we saw an impact of over 15 cases that were reported within Nakawa Banda area, which was one of the impact that we were able to notice right away.
How do you encourage young people like yourself to find a path towards advocacy?
As a way of solving gender-based violence, in Uganda or globally, we need to further advocate for policies that are implementable. There are a number of policies that have been put at the bench, but they're not implementable. They do not offer any solutions. They do not work completely. So as advocates, we need to be very critical and intentional around these policies, but also not forgetting the trends that are following within our countries. For example, apparently we are on the technological trend. So we need to look at advocating for solutions that move along with the trends that are happening in the country globally. It does not matter whether Uganda or where, but also putting in mind how best can we include other people that cannot jump directly onto these trends.
That was Inviola Nambi, a Ugandan gender-based violence activist, speaking to VOA's Anthony Labruto. And it's time for our entertainment report. And here is Heather Maxwell. Hello, Heather.
Hello, Esther. Yeah, today I'm putting the spotlight on one of East Africa's brightest and youngest stars. Multi-award-winning Kenyan singer-songwriter Nikita Kering spoke with me in Nairobi about her phenomenal record-breaking career in music and fashion at just 21 years old.
In just 5 years, the 21-year-old Kenyan ex-hitmaker Nikita Kering has made incredible record-breaking strides in music and fashion. But she's aiming higher and farther with dreams of digging deeper into tradition. This multi-award-winning singer-songwriter has won several accolades, including 4 top All-Africa Music Awards, commonly known as Afrima, and Pulse Music Video Awards. She's also made history twice for being the youngest to have won and done things. At 16, she's the youngest ever to win any Afrima award, and at age 20, the youngest to participate in Coke Studio.
I did Fenty last year when they were launching their brand. It was fun. It was crazy. It was a big opportunity. It like blew up the industry here in Kenya. Just being like, oh my God, they actually chose me for such an opportunity. For me, that was insane. They were looking for a young East Africa to represent the launch of their products here in Africa, and I guess I came to mind. Yeah,
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Do you still wear the Fenty
I
cosmetics?
do. I'm wearing Fenty right now.
It's beautiful.
Always
You're so
wearing Fenty.
shining and radiant.
Thank you. I love Fenty. Yeah.
What about Coke Studio?
Yeah, Coke Studio was this year. Coke Studio has been amazing. I didn't even know that it was going to be this big. I was able to represent East Africa in this year's Coke Studio, also the youngest to ever do Coke Studio. So that again was huge.
But even when we try to throw this all behind
there's billboards everywhere. It's honestly crazy. But also collaborating with artists from around Kenya, from Nigeria. It's been an honor.
And will you be touring
Africa?
Africa?
Yeah, well, we already did that. Now it's just Kenya.
Already done Africa tour, already been the brand ambassador for Fenty Beauty and Coke Studios and others not even mentioned. But when asked about next big steps, Nikita surprised me with her dream to turn back home and dig deeper into her Nandi roots.
What are your dreams now for the future?
Wow. To be the face of East Africa is like the most important thing to me, and perhaps in the future to be the face of Africa. And again, I am so deeply rooted in my culture and my tribe, and I want to be able to show the world where I come from.
Where
and
are
I know
you
that
from?
Kenya. I'm from Eldoret. I am a Kalenjin. I'm a Nandi.
How would you bring Nandi culture into your music? Instruments, melodies, dance?
All of that. Dance especially. There's also the fashion bit that no one really gets to see because there's little that's been documented, especially for women. I'm glad that I have relatives that are still deep in the culture, so they remember things. And my great-grandparents, they remember and they tell me about it.
Nikita Kering, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This was too brief and too fun. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, joining me in the studio is Voice of America intern Skylar Van Tassel, who's also a musician and global music enthusiast. Hey, Skylar.
Hi, Heather.
Nice to have you on the platform.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, so what do you think about Nikita?
I think she's absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's so inspiring to see someone my age, I'm also 21, making such waves within African music and within music as large, because it really carves out this space for young musicians to prosper. I mean, you take Africa, according to the UN, 60% of people there are under 25. Right. Which is just a fantastic statistic.
Gen Zers.
Yeah.
Had you ever heard of Coke's studio before?
A little bit, but I wasn't completely familiar with it. Yeah.
I found it fascinating too. And you know, Coke Studio says that music is the #1 passion point for Gen Zers. Do you think that's true?
I definitely do. You know, I think some of the stuff I heard around Coke Studios, you know, they've included artists from Pakistan, from South Korea, increasingly from Africa, and it really helps kind of give that space to a lot of the, you know, I think artists that have been traditionally overlooked, and so like bringing their voices up, bringing their art kind of to the forefront globally is really important.
Yeah, and the collaboration that they're doing. I mean, you're a jazz musician, a guitarist. Maybe you can join.
Hopefully, one day.
All right, thanks so much for being on.
Absolutely.
Esther, that's it for today. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Heather, for that entertainment report, and Skylar there. And that's our show for today. Be sure to join Heather Maxwell again next Friday. And from all of us here in Washington, we ask you again to join us on voaafrica.com. Have a great weekend, everyone.